Hey,
Let's do
welcome
this.
back to the Brownie Points podcast. We got a special quote unquote audio episode for you. It may have been in contact with a communicable disease, so we're out of an abundance of caution. We're recording this audio only. We're going to try to keep it tight, not drag on too long. Next week, we should be able to be right back to our typical video format. We will still have the best bets, Levi's locks, that will still be coming out. So getting right into it, our segments today, we're going to do a quick recap of the game, which will lead us into a discussion about Deshaun Watson. Are we encouraged by his performance? We're not going to talk about Amari Cooper. I know he did not have another good game. He had another really bad drop. But Amari Cooper's a veteran, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, I think 7 1,000-yard seasons in his career. He deserves the benefit of the doubt. This is not yet a story, in our opinion. If we get to week 3, 4, 5, and he's still looking like this, then it becomes a story. But at this point, it is not, according to us. Then we're going to have our Brownie Points segment, which if you're first-time listeners, where we award Brownie Points, which is like stars, or basically our way of commending the best performers on offense and the best performers on defense. The more Brownie Points you get, the better your performance was, with a max of 3 Brownie Points. Our final segment would be our look ahead versus the Giants. We'll preview that game, and we'll give you our score predictions as usual. Last week we were wrong, and that was a good thing because we thought the Browns were going to lose. So hopefully this week we are right and the Browns win. So, Levi, let's get right into it. Quick recap of that game.
Yeah, absolutely. So, not sure what to think. It's tricky in the NFL early weeks. You know, certain teams look good, certain teams look bad, certain teams then flip right around in a couple of weeks. So, you come and play the Jags. They have some expectations coming into the season, but overall played pretty well. They're coming off a clear loss to the Dolphins. They come in here. At the end of the day, we go to Jacksonville and we get a win on the road, and that's always good. It's never bad to get a win on the road. Our defense was not good on the road last year. As you pointed out, they played pretty well this time around. I would actually go so far as to say they played very well, because a lot of their breakdowns did happen in the second half, and it was later in the second half as the offense consistently was getting off the field earlier and earlier and earlier every drive. And again, when the defense is consistently having to be on the field, not only do they get tired, the other team's offense also gets to see what they're doing, get used to their tricks, and gets more chance for a coverage bust or something of the like. So I thought they played very well, all things considered, and they came in the clutch near the end with a win. On offense, they did enough. It wasn't ideal. There were several mistakes made, but all in all, it was a win on the road, and you feel a little bit better after the absolute disaster in week 1 that they can come out and get a win.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the most crucial signs, or I should say one of the biggest signs of a great team, is when you get embarrassed, how do you respond? Typically, the great teams respond with reverse embarrassment, right? If you get embarrassed, you embarrass the other team the next week. I wouldn't know that I would say they embarrassed the Jaguars, but they certainly had an encouraging response to the embarrassment that happened last week. Of course, the big story from that game, the biggest one, has to be Deshaun Watson. It will be every week. Were you encouraged by his performance?
I mean, yes and no. On one hand, I'm certainly somewhat encouraged because last week he was awful. This week he wasn't awful, and that's good. So
Yeah,
I'm happy
the bar
about
was on the
that.
floor.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm happy because if he played like he did last week, we're not winning games, period. Like, you know, then all of a sudden we're looking at a top end pick. And that's a whole other set of problems, right? So that seems to have been left behind. That does seem to be a week 1 rust thing, partially, arguably, about not playing at all in the preseason, but ultimately that's behind us. On the other hand, it wasn't better than we saw really last year, right? Past week 1 and 2
Exactly.
last year, very similar to that level. There was some bright side. I do want to also be fair to Deshaun. There were some drops. There were several of them. So, you know, it definitely would have looked a little better on the stat line, and possibly one of those drives could have led to a score. I don't want to be unfair. Cooper had a shot at a big one, so...
But he also had that throw that should have been a pick. He also had that throw that should have been a pick.
Yeah.
And then they
100%.
ended up scoring on that drive. So I feel like it balanced out in that game. The drop by Amari Cooper is balanced out by his should have been intercepted throw.
That's true, but Njoku also dropped one. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's not perfect. I'm just saying, he did have some on that side from guys you wouldn't expect that from, and I just want to throw that out there. But ultimately, yeah, where you saw production was quick decisions, quick throws. Things were there over the middle, slants. He didn't really have to do a lot of processing, and that's kind of what you're going to work on best. His arm is still pretty solid. He's struggling with the deep ball, but his intermediate... He's struggling with the deep ball, but his intermediary ball is still good. 15 to 20-yard ball still has velocity, and therefore it is beating out defenses. It forces defenses to stretch a certain amount. At least you're not stuck with that guy with the noodle arm who can't move at all. So you're getting something out of it, which is good. You would like to see him get to the point of being able to throw the deep ball, but ultimately what you saw
was
is
a huge improvement over last week. I feel like that's being a little unfair. I thought his accuracy beyond 15, 20 yards was decent this week, especially
It was
compared to
decent.
last week.
That's fair. I mean, he's definitely a lot better. It just feels like it's still somewhat limited, right? Like we're back to last year. Like solid enough.
Yes.
If the defense is playing really well, you can win, which is great. And we might have another good year. Like, hooray. But at the end of the day, at a certain point, you have to aim for a Super Bowl. Like at a certain point, that has to be on the table, especially when you have the talent that this team has. You got to shoot for a Super Bowl, and it doesn't feel like he can do that for you. So unless he starts to progress further, it puts aside that immediate five ring alarm, like red, red status brown, whatever your worst status is. Like
Yeah.
it's the end of the world. It's not there, but we went from the fire back into the frying pan. It's not the worst alert, but at the same time, we're back to okay, but this isn't nearly good enough. So hopefully he continues to progress, but otherwise I feel like we're headed towards a year where he's doing all right. He's fine. They have a good year because the defense is good, but you might start looking for some options to get rid of him. But on the other hand, if he does continue along this route and at least looks okay and they get some wins, you might be able to actually move him and only eat some of his money instead of all of it.
Yeah. I mean, he had a great first half. His second half was okay, which is basically what we were seeing last year, right? He was never putting together complete games. It was either good second half, bad first half, good first half, bad second half, things like that. And that's kind of what we saw today. But considering where we began last week, it's hard to be pessimistic about progress, no matter how small that progress might be. So no, he didn't go from complete bum to superstar, but he did go from bum to somebody who can actually help you win a game, because his performance in that first half was the kind of performances that would help you win a game. The throws off balance, moving to his left, moving to his right, those are the kind of plays that you acquire a player of his caliber to make. And he was making some of those throws in that first half. So we hope, obviously, that can continue. And the thing is, we don't know what would have happened last year. If given more time, he might have continued to be able to put together those second halves and first halves into a complete game, but then he got injured. So we'll see what happens this year. All right, let's roll into our Brownie Points segment. I know we have a lot of agreement on this one. Let's start off with the offense. I have 3 Brownie Points for Judy. You did as well, Levi. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. I thought Jerry Judy looked really good. It was really exciting to see. We traded for him. We gave him a lot of money, so we really have a lot riding on him. And he showed up and he showed out. He was making plays. He looked athletic. He looked fast. He was getting open a lot. I mean, I was very encouraged by what I saw. He really looked like the guy that you were trading for, that you gave the money for. He looked like that guy, and that was super encouraging, especially because it wasn't like it was a 350-yard day or anything crazy where everybody was lighting it up. It was only him lighting it up, and he really did. And so that was really great to see and very encouraging, and it felt good and gives you a little more faith in Andrew Berry, not just Jerry Jeudy individually, just because he gave him that money. Now you feel a little bit better that maybe he sees something in him.
Yeah, absolutely. And who do you got at 2 Brownie Points and 1 Brownie Point? I can't remember for sure if we fully agreed.
I actually don't have anyone for 2 Brownie Points.
Okay, me neither. So we're in agreement there.
Yeah. And then for 1 Brownie Point, I actually have Deshaun Watson. He made a big improvement, and he had moments where he looked good, and he led them to a win, and I want to recognize that. And so for that reason, I do want to give Deshaun Watson some credit. I'm going to give him 1 Brownie Point. He got the win. Ultimately, didn't turn the ball over. I know one was close, but he didn't. So ultimately, I'm going to give him a Brownie Point and hope for better next week.
Yeah, just like the MVP award, the quarterback is always going to have an outsized influence on the Brownie Point segment. And at the end of the day, what Deshaun Watson did in that first half set the table, and obviously were critical in helping them secure the win. So I also have 1 Brownie Point for Deshaun Watson, and then a little honorable mention for Corey Bojorquez with that incredible punt that honestly might have saved the day because the Jags moved the ball. The amount of movement that they had to get from where they did to where they ended up at the end of the game, if they had gotten that ball at the 35, they probably would have scored. Now, moving on to the defense.
If I might throw on, if I might throw on an honorable mention for Deontay Foreman, actually. I mean, Jacoby Ford had one great run. That's great. We've seen him do that. But I was happy. And honestly, this is partly a Stefanski honorable mention, just throwing Foreman out there, letting him run, and giving us that power run game we needed. It's not that it was game-changing. It's not that he was opening up huge runs, but giving you that solid 3-4 yard run that they had to respect and open up the play action. That was critical. And so honorable mention for Foreman / Stefanski for bringing back the power run game to Cleveland.
Yeah, and there did seem to be a clear emphasis to run the ball a little bit more at the beginning of that game after what happened in the last one. Okay, let's talk about our defensive brownie points. I know we're both in agreement here. We both have JOK with 3 brownie points. What do you want to say about his performance? Because I thought he was pretty incredible and impactful.
I mean, I love it. I like that he really is the I think the example of this new breed of linebacker. These quicker, faster, more instinctual linebackers that have really, I think, come about the most because of what's happened with the dual threat quarterback. That these guys are blowing up. Not to mention the tight ends with how explosive they've been. That there's been this movement towards this linebacker who can do more to track down quarterbacks, who can do more to close up the middle of the field from those tight ends that have caused so much problems for defenses in recent years. Not to mention, especially with these dual threat quarterbacks who really love those tight ends often, really taking that away. And you really see it because he's everywhere. He's super fast. He's super athletic. Once upon a time, he would have been called a tweener, but now he's called an awesome linebacker that you pay a bunch of money to. And he showed it again this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And at 2 brownie points, we both have Martin Emerson, I believe, which is really kind of just picking somebody out from that secondary because everybody in that secondary, I think, showed up. They did a great job locking down the receivers. Even a number of the completions that the Jags were able to make were despite the super tight coverage. So overall, a good game from the secondary, and just highlighting Martin Emerson a little bit more. Might have gone to Denzel Ward, but he did have that injury. At 1 is where we do have our disagreement. At 1 brownie point, I am giving it to Myles Garrett. I know that Alex Wright had that big play at the end, but for me, Myles Garrett was a big reason why he was even able to get that play. Alex Wright was able to just shift off his block and grab him because Myles Garrett's penetration forced Trevor Lawrence out of the pocket and into the pathway of Alex Wright. And that's not to take away from Alex Wright. I'm highlighting Myles Garrett and how he was impactful even on those plays, and why it's important to look at more than just the sack totals and the pressure totals from Myles Garrett. He really has this enormous impact throughout the game. I mean, I'm sure you saw him on Twitter or whatever, where he's basically being tackled by the offensive lineman. I mean, you could talk about this every single week. Myles Garrett is constantly being held. It's basically the only defense most offensive linemen even have to try and stop him. And despite that, he still was able to get his penetration and knock the ball loose from Trevor Lawrence on that one play. Number of plays where he's getting penetration and beating his man, maybe not getting to the quarterback, but collapsing that pocket and making the play happen in a way the Jags did not intend. And so I think that Myles Garrett had a big impact on that game, even though on the stat sheet looks like he just had that 1 sack and that was that. But I know you had somebody else at 1 brownie point. Who did you have?
So I actually did have Alex Wright. Myles Garrett played well. I'm not knocking him. I also tend to, if I feel like it's close, I'm not necessarily going to give the point to the guy who we expect to be dominant and then was good,
That's
but
fair.
there was another guy who played very close. I'm going to give the edge to that person, especially because I've been very much encouraged by Alex Wright and how he's been coming along. And for him to, in a big moment in the game, have an opportunity and take advantage of it to get the safety. It's not just a sack, it's a safety. I mean, Myles Garrett's whole career has been about making the sack when it matters, like when it had the most impact. And it was great to see Alex Wright step up. And when it had a huge impact, that's when he had a huge play. Getting the safety, putting us up 5, could have sealed the game. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get enough first downs. Not to mention, there was that boneheaded play where Watson snapped the ball early, which was a little off. But ultimately, being up by 5 instead of 3 is the reason we won, because the Jaguars had to go for the end zone and not the field goal. So it was really big. And because of the impact it had and him making that kind of play when it matters, I'm going to give that 1 brownie point to Alex Wright.
All right, fair enough. Let's cover the Browns versus the Giants coming up. I mean, that's a game for me. I feel like you got to circle that one with how things have gone, right? The Jags' first half was great, but that second half was not super great, right? Letting the Jags back into that game. So they get embarrassed in week 1. They have a great first half against the Jags, then kind of let go a little bit, let the Jags come back in. You'd think the Giants is that game where they can hopefully put it all together and have a statement win. I'm going to get straight to my score prediction. I mean, obviously I feel confident the Browns are going to win this game. The Giants don't have much of an offense, not against a team like the Browns. And I think the Browns are going to win this game 24-13.
Yeah, I'm going to say that they're definitely going to win. I feel like they definitely should. I also think it's the kind of game where you really want to handle them. If you're not handling them, like if you are not ahead by a considerable margin and comfortably in the lead, then I am worried, because these are the kind of games where if you're going to be a contender, this is where you need to stay ahead. This needs to be a no-brainer.
Yeah, this can't be a close game.
Yeah, like the Giants are finding ways to lose people. They set a record this past week.
Yeah, I
The
saw
first
that.
team in
It's
NFL
crazy.
history to score 3 touchdowns, not give up a touchdown, and lose. I mean,
It's hard to wrap your
that's
head
what
on
they
how that's
did.
possible.
Just so many field goals. And
Yeah.
the Commanders were not good, right? I mean, obviously, by the way, the game played out, besides for the losing part. So they had a lot
Hmm.
of opportunity. They still lose. They find ways to lose. That's great. But ultimately, it's not just about winning. You got to put a statement down. You haven't had the best first couple of weeks. I know you got this win this week, but it wasn't like glorious or anything like that. But you are playing at home. Take advantage of it. The one guy you got to watch out for is Malik Neighbors. He did really great last week. Now, the Commander secondary is not very good, but Denzel Ward is injured. Neighbors is very explosive. Now, they'll probably throw a double team on him, so I don't think he's going to be going crazy all game, but he's the one guy to keep an eye on. Besides for that, they're not too explosive. Keep them contained. Keep on top of them. Offense in the second half, if you're up by a lot, even if you don't need a lot of points, you do need to get first downs. Eat up some clock, make sure your defense has time to rest, get to midfield, pin them back, do that at least, even if you're up by a lot. Those are my notes. I think that they do win 24-10, and I do think that the Giants are scoring late in that scenario.
Okay. I mean, yeah, so pretty similar score line.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I mean, it's to be expected. We got to wrap it up over here, but I just want to say thank you. I mean, if you listen to this episode, you are a true fan. We cannot thank you enough. We'll be back next week. We should be back on video again. Levi's Locks is still happening. I'm actually editing that video. I was editing that video right before we started shooting this, so that will be coming out, if not tonight, tomorrow. And we had a little bit of a disappointing week on the Levi's Locks, so we're down a little bit, but we are still trying to hit our goal of 10xing, turning $100 into $1,000. That is the goal by season's end. If that interests you, keep an eye out for that video or hit subscribe, whatever works for you, and we'll see you soon.